welcome to the Agricultural Engineering Podcast. This podcast covers all aspects of agricultural engineering. It is produced by the South African Institute of Agricultural Engineers. The series of episodes that will be brought to you has been funded by the Royal Academy of Engineering. We encourage you to tune in and explore the exciting world of agricultural engineering with us. My name is Udhav Maharaj, and I'm your host for today's episode. Hi, Charlie Nicklin, and welcome to the South African Institute of Agricultural Engineers podcast. And I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today. I know that you're the CEO of the Institute of Agricultural Engineers in the United Kingdom, but maybe you can provide a little bit of background for the audience about who you are and what your interests are.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'll give you a quick life history. I grew up on a mixed farm in Staffordshire in the UK. I suppose I'm the stereotypical ag engineer from the UK that got to sort of mess around with tractors as a kid and motorbikes, and that really got me into engineering through a sort of vocational routes. And then I studied sort of diploma level and then went on to university and did a degree. And then I started my career in agrochemicals, so animal feed, processing plants, looking at spraying equipment. I did that for a few years. But really it was machinery, engines that sort of floated my boat, and I applied for some roles in JCB in the UK. So I managed to get a job as a design engineer working on the load-all products, which is the telescopic handlers that JCB make, as a design engineer. And I rose through the ranks, did that for about 9 years, and towards the end of my time on the telehandler products, I looked after all the agricultural projects for JCB. Then I got a big promotion and I became chief engineer for the Fast Track, which is the high-speed tractor that JCB make. I did that for about 11 years, and then I took a similar role on backhoe loaders, which is the traditional JCB that many people recognise around the world. And I did that for about 5 years. And then in 2020, I had the opportunity to do something different with COVID going on. So I left JCB and then interestedly got involved with the Institute of Agricultural Engineers. I'd been a member of the organisation since I was a student, so I knew about it already. But I'm now obviously the CEO and run the organisation, which I've done for about 4 years now.
That's an interesting journey, Charlie. And it's quite nice that you can see the links from your childhood to the career path that you chose. And I'm sure that tractors must have been a really big passion for you. And it's really good that you got to work in the field that you're passionate about.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's quite a common story with engineers in the UK, is that certainly with agricultural engineers, they tend to have got some connection with farming or agriculture that's got them interested. And that can be quite a barrier for people who are not got that agricultural connection. Is trying to get people into agricultural engineering. They need to know about it, and it's almost like the best kept secret, and it's something we need to try and improve.
Yeah, earlier we did have conversations about the stigma linked to agricultural engineering in South Africa, and I'm not sure about in the UK, but I think when you generally hear agriculture, people think about farming, and in South Africa there is a potential limitation to the numbers in terms of students studying agricultural engineering because of the stigma. So if you had, in your experience, anything similar to this, but it does seem that although you have a agricultural engineering degree, you did do a lot of work in mechanization. So yeah, I just wanted to check if there's anything that you had to say to young learners in schools or young students studying engineering. What advice would you give them about the stigmas linked to engineering or agricultural engineering, and what would that advice be?
It's just before I answer that. Yeah, it's interesting about your lean towards agriculture. In the UK, we have similar issues, but not that. It's in the UK, if you say I'm an agricultural engineer, most people think you fix tractors, and it's associated with that. And I think engineer itself is often associated with somebody who fixes things. Yeah. And that's just reality, and that's how people understand it. And it probably stems from years ago. Back in Victorian times, the engineers tended to get their hands dirty. Yeah. And I think people still think that, and it's clearly a misconception. It's not a legislated title, so anybody can use the word engineer, but if you're a chartered engineer or a professional engineer, then that's quite different. But yeah, onto the question. I do a lot of talks to students, and I generally say the same thing, and I explain what agricultural engineering is all about. Most of the time you're talking to people who've already made a decision. It's not school children. But I explain that, and I generally say that most people think an agricultural engineer is somebody who does something with tractors and combines and so on. And then I go on and always explain, well, actually, it's a soil scientist, it's an environmental engineer, it's a precision farming specialist, and all these other things that are associated with agriculture. And I think it's with us, if you say agricultural engineers, people think you're very engineering orientated, and they don't see the agricultural bit. So it's almost the opposite of your challenge in Africa. But yeah, it's an exciting time to be involved in the subject, and I think we don't have many discussions in the UK without sustainability, environmental and climate and things like that coming into it. And it's every second word in agriculture these days is sustainability. Yeah. And I think that's a good pull to young people, trying to get them involved, is that, you know, young people are very aware of the environmental challenges now. So that's something we play on as well. And the technology is the big draw, I always say. In our part of the world, you know, there's a lot of technology going on, and it's just showcasing that technology to young people to get them interested in the subject.
Yeah, definitely. We are in the fourth industrial revolution, and probably at the step of the fifth industrial revolution. And for big data, analytics, new technology, and drones, it's obviously really fascinating for young people and even engineers when you think about these aspects of the fourth and fifth industrial revolution, like remote sensing and the like. So with there being so many different aspects that tie into agriculture at the moment, I think it's definitely an interesting field to be in, and you can apply lots of different thinking techniques to the work that you do. So if you take a farm, for example, you could bring in the Internet of Things, you could bring in drones, you could bring in satellites, you could think of all of that together and then bring more interesting stuff on top of that. So all of these layers with machine learning and artificial intelligence and computer vision, I'm sure that in Africa, there's definitely going to be a boom in agricultural engineering. And we recently had a conversation with a professor from the University of Bath, and he was quite shocked with some of the work that we do in South Africa. But I think if you had to highlight some of the interesting, innovative technologies in the UK that you find interesting and that you think would be applicable in South Africa, I'd be really happy to hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been drawn to the technology. Make no apology for being a tractor nut. You know, I love tractors. I love the equipment. I love the technology involved in it. The industry is going through a really interesting time in that, you know, trying to get rid of fossil fuels is obviously a big thing in Europe. And it's what do you do with farm machinery? What do you do with your average 200 horsepower tractor? And there's some people scratching their heads with this sort of stuff at the moment. So, you know, smaller equipment does lend itself to electrification. Machines that are based, you know, in yards, small machines with low duty cycles, but big tractors, even small tractors as well, it can be electrified, and that's happening. But big tractors is still a little bit up in the air in terms of which technology direction they're gonna take. So all that side of it is really interesting. I must admit, I love diesel engines, but the reality is, unfortunately, they are going to go. But I love that this sort of the openness that's going on in terms of what route are you going to take. I mean, it's fantastic to be an engineer. You know, if you look at diesel, it's dominated from 50 horsepower to 500 horsepower for the last, 50, 60 years or whatever. Yeah. And all of a sudden that's changing. And that really affects machine design and what you do with machines. So all the sort of driveline engineering can change. We can look at electric drive lines and all sorts of things. So that really excites me. But I suppose you've got to then look at it. Well, what's the customer getting out of it? And I think, the customer, as we went through emissions regulations, the customer really gets nothing out of it because, yes, they get a tractor that is kinder to the environment, but the reality is the customer's doesn't see that benefit. But if you look at the technology, if you just take tractors and harvesting machinery, the technology on board is phenomenal now. And it must be brilliant to be a young operator work in this machinery, because what the machines can do now is superb, and I think that's really exciting. This technological journey that we're on with precision agriculture and guidance systems on machines, and it really opens up the industry. The visual camera guidance and that sort of stuff is really accelerating at the moment. We've got machines that can identify weeds and react accordingly. It's just that technology explosion, I'd say, really excites me.
Yeah, you have to think about what the customer is actually getting out of it, because yes, they do get a tractor, but the reality is that the customer doesn't really see the environment as a benefit when you think about tractors. But if you do look at technology alone, if you just take the tractors and harvesting machines and all of the different equipment that farmers have available to them, the technology on board is phenomenal now. And it must be brilliant to be a young operator working this machinery, because what the machinery and the machines can do is actually superb. And I think that's very exciting as well. And this technological journey that we're on with precision agriculture and guidance systems and machines, it really just opens up the industry. So if you think about visual camera guidance and all of the technology linked to that, it's really the right moment for young people to get into the field. And I mean, we've got machines that can identify weeds and react accordingly. It's just that technology explosion, I'd say, that excites me.
I think the main thing is you've got to, as an engineer, sometimes step back from that exciting stuff and see it through the customer's eyes. What is the farmer going to get out of this? What's going to make his job easier? What's going to earn him more money? And I think the precision stuff, some people will say auto steer on tractors takes the skill out of it, but what it does, it means it's taking the fatigue out of it. So you don't have to concentrate on driving straight. You let the tractor do that, and you can concentrate on other things that are more important. So I think always stand back, see it through the customer's eyes, and think, what's the customer going to get out of this? What's this technology going to do for them? So I think that's really important.
Yeah, definitely. When you speak about the technology out there, you have to acknowledge the level of precision and control that you can achieve now with the tractor. There's a lot of exciting things out there, but if you have to look at the standard first principles of your tractor, your perspective of where technology is going and what the future holds, what are some of the key principles that you think should be kept as they are in terms of tractor design and operation?
I think for Europe, it's and the US to a certain extent, I think the tractor design over the last 100 years is really matured now. And I think we've got a fairly accepted format. You've obviously got four-wheel drive tractors that are articulated, be it wheeled or tracks. They seem to be fairly settled in design. Very, very US orientated, but you see a lot of articulated tractors in the UK and Europe, especially on tracks. They give a real light footprint, so they're not too harsh on the soils despite their size. The JCB tractor is very different. It's an equal wheeled format, four-wheel steer. And I think there's room in the market for that type of specialist vehicle with a cab in the middle and different attachment points. But I think in the main, traditional tractors with the slightly larger rear wheels, I think the format is very accepted. And I don't see that changing much now. I think the drive line will obviously change to suit whatever happens with engines. I suspect engines will become hydrogen fuel cell with electric drive. So the transmission and drive line will become electrified, and it'll be a hydrogen fuel cell providing the power. I'm pretty sure that's the way it will go. I think a lot of the truck industry is working towards that. So that change in driveline layout will allow designers to do things differently on machines. So that might open up machine design a bit more. But I think the reality is the cab towards the back end, most implements are attached on the back. That's why tractors have big back wheels, traction and visibility, and that's why the cab's at the back, and I think that format's probably going to be around for a long time, I would pick up on autonomous things. That I think I think we'll see traditional style tractors with autonomous options to allow them to be driverless, but I think they'll still retain cabs because you've still got to get the tractor to and from the field, certainly in Europe. And also you want to use that tractor for other jobs. It's not always going to be in a field going backwards and forwards, dragging a cultivator. And I also see then specially designed autonomous vehicles for specific tasks. In my head, I would imagine they will stay fairly small in size because you've got to transport those machines around, and you'll end up putting them on the back of low loaders and things like that. So I think it'd be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm definitely keen to follow the space and see what happens. But just something I thought about while you were speaking. So if you are a farmer currently farming or an agricultural engineer working with a farmer, and you come across a situation where the farmer has all of their tools and tractors and implements, is there any potential for them to actually retrofit these older tools or traditional tools to be used for conservation agriculture or any of the new types of practices that the tractors are being designed for?
Yeah. I think you'll hear people talk about regenerative agriculture. I think some of us that are a bit more long in the tooth and a bit more cynical would probably say, well, that's just what we'd call mixed farming in the UK. And if you went back, well, you don't need to go back. If you look at some farms in the UK, they will have arable crops, they will have beef cattle, they might have sheep, they might have dairy cows. That's your traditional mixed farm. And you've got that lovely old cycle in there of, they farm animals, animal manure and slurry goes on the land, they grow crops, the slurry and manure fertilises crops, and you've got this lovely cycle that's existed for hundreds of years. And I think where the problems lie is where you've got areas that are just pure arable monocrop. That's where we have challenges around the condition of the soil, because the soil is just pulverised every year to grow wheat, to grow barley, to grow rapeseed oil, and the land just doesn't get this recovery. So I think there's various things going on where people are starting to use things like direct drills. So here you hear min-till, but also zero or no-till now. In terms of retrofitting, yes, it's the same tractor that will do the job, but if you're going to move over to a no-till system, then it is different equipment. Okay. So you would invest in a new seed drill, and that will be a zero-till seed drill. And there's lots of development in the UK and Europe on different types of drill to cope with different types of soil, and really, really clever bits of equipment. And I think zero-till and min-till is going on it's pretty widespread now, because there's a huge saving in fuel and labour from not ploughing and heavy cultivating, but not all land allows that. So if you look at where I live in Cheshire, we grow a lot of maize crops, which is chopped for animal feed through the winter. And despite the best will in the world, you're cutting that maize at a time of the year when the land is wet, and you will churn the land up with heavy equipment. So the only option there is to cultivate it and plough it and turn it over. And I think the reality is there is nothing wrong with doing that. It incorporates organic matter. If you look at the soils around us, they're really nice soils. They're not abused. But I think where the problems lie is probably in the monocrop areas, where it's just pulverising soil, grow the same crop over and over again. And they're really starting to see some challenges around that now. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're abused, but I think where the problem lies probably is in the monocrop areas, where tilling they just pulverize the soil and grow the same crop over and over again. And that's where they're really starting to see some challenges around that now. And I think it really boils down to doing what is best for your situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think every situation is different. I mean, we're very lucky in the UK that we've got a wide range of soils. Certainly in my area, the soil is lovely sandy soil, and the soil scientists would probably cringe at me saying it, but it's amazing how easily and quickly the land recovers. and the biodiversity is there because there's plenty of worms in the soil, and it just recovers really well. Yeah. And you've got to look after it, don't get me wrong, but I think that's the problem with some of the arable areas that are now seeing. And I think these are things that, you look at agriculture in South Africa, is just, you've got to look, we've had lots of discussions at the conference. You've got to look at all the different technologies around the world and cherry pick what suits Africa and leapfrog things. You don't need to do the same things that other people have done, and it's very application specific to your application, isn't it? So.
Definitely. I think you're right about that. And you said you have to look at all of the different options and what works for you. Because obviously, if you've got a different type of soil, you don't want to do something that's going to make the situation worse. So definitely you need to match your tractors to your situation. And you have to look at the bigger picture as well. So the country you're in and the other powers that are influencing your decisions.
I mean, so even tractors, what's the point of investing in diesel-powered tractors in Africa when we're about to change out? You've got an abundance of sun and solar, and electric drives are getting better and better. So there's nothing saying you don't just leapfrog technology and go straight in with something more modern. Yeah,
that's really a good point. I think the audience must definitely keep in mind, so when you're looking at the present and into the future, that the key is that you need to look at what infrastructure you have to support you at the farm level, and then you need to move forward.
I think that the key as well is that, and you hear that a lot in discussion, is that you've got to have that infrastructure to support it from farm level right up. So it's great having these new products, but unless you've got people who know how to maintain and service and operate them and fix them when they go wrong and have parts available, and all that side of it's got to go with it. Yeah. And I think you see examples of that where people have got lovely new equipment, then it breaks down and then nobody can fix it. Yeah. There's no parts, and that's terrible, that is. So I think it's really important to put emphasis on, I think you call them artisans in Africa, so those we call them technicians or mechanics, is making sure that you focus on those vocational skills and making sure you've got people who know how to fix machines, know how to commission them with customers and so on.
Yeah, the after service part is definitely super important, and I think it's something that has to be kept in mind in Africa, especially because we may not have access to everything that other people in the world have access to. But Charlie, it's been really interesting chatting to you and getting your insights on the industry and just hearing about the differences in mechanization in the UK and Africa, and just getting a feel for where the industry is moving towards and going to be in the future.
Yeah, that's the bit I've enjoyed. Is my knowledge of Africa is not huge, and I think what's opened my eyes is the difference between the totally unmechanized, cultivating the ground by hand, right through to modern enterprises that exist, and you've got this vast array. Whereas we obviously don't have that so much these days in Europe. So that's been really interesting.
Yeah, there's some places in Africa where there's a smallholder farmer sitting right next to a commercial farmer, and he can look over and see exactly what's being practiced on the commercial farm. So it's definitely an interesting place to be in, because that motivation could be there, but it could also reduce farmer agency.
I think we've all got to try and do our best to make the discipline more visible to people and get people to understand it. And it's not just trying to get everybody to be an agricultural engineer. And we often say that you have an engineer who's working in agriculture. He's not necessarily an agricultural engineer, because they might be an electrical engineer, but they're working in the agricultural space. So they're an engineer in agriculture, but they're not an agricultural engineer. But that's where we need to explain and get those people to understand that they're working in the agricultural engineering space, and just recognise that.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be following the UK IAgrE Eng and seeing what's going on in the space in the UK. And we've got plenty of members in Africa that will also be interested in what you are doing. So I wanted to just check, do you have a LinkedIn page or any platform where people can follow you?
Yes, I have, yeah. Okay. And IAgrE has as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So just look us up on LinkedIn, yeah.
Okay, we will definitely do that. And it's good to always just keep an eye on what's out there. But I'm sure we will speak again, and it's been a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your time, Charlie.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Okay, and now we wrap up our episode with Charlie Nicklin, who's the CEO of the UK Agricultural Engineering Institute. It was really good chatting to Charlie about mechanization in Africa and the UK and just getting a feel for the gap between mechanization in the two areas. It was also encouraging to hear Charlie say that Africa could potentially skip a few steps in terms of modernizing mechanization. And it was also interesting to hear the stigma attached to agricultural engineers in the UK are more linked to mechanization. So agricultural engineers are seen as people that work with tractors. With that being said, please keep an eye out for the next episode of the South African Institute of Agricultural Engineers podcast. And please like, follow, and subscribe to the podcast on any platform that you prefer. So YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Thank you.